She left her child with family who ignored him on the beach until he nearly drowned. Then she reported and made all them pay. Mornings in Florida start early. The sun rising from the eastern horizon cast a golden light on the white sand of Miami Beach. In a condominium along the shoreline, Melissa Carter quietly awoke. Looking at her 7-year-old son, Jacob's sleeping face in the bed next to hers, she smiled gently. It was the morning of the 3rd day of their trip. She could not have expected that this vacation would be anything but peaceful. "Mom, are you up?" Jacob said in a small voice, rubbing his eyes. "Good morning," Melissa stroked her son's tousled hair. "It looks like we will have a lovely beach day today." The phone rang, and despite the early hour, Mom flashed on the screen. Melissa let out a small sigh before answering. "Good morning, Mom." "Melissa, what are your plans for today?" Carol Wilson's voice had its usual hurried tone. "Mom, it is only 7 o'clock. I was planning to have breakfast with Jacob and then meet you at the beach around 10 o'clock, remember? You are sleeping in that late." Vanessa and her children have been up for 1 hour already. Her kids are in the habit of rising early. Melissa closed her eyes and slowly counted to 10. Her life had been a series of conversations like this. Her mother, Carol, could not help but criticize Melissa's parenting choices. "Fine, but let us still meet at 10 as planned." After hanging up, Melissa turned to Jacob. "Are you looking forward to meeting Grandma, Aunt Vanessa, and your cousins at the beach?" Jacob thought for a moment before answering, "Well, I want to play with Ethan and Olivia, but I do not think Grandma likes me." Melissa's heart ached. Her son had picked up on his grandmother's subtle attitude. "That is not true. Grandma is just a little strict," she answered, carefully choosing her words. Jacob's birth was not planned. When Melissa was 28, she became pregnant after a brief relationship, and the man disappeared without taking responsibility. Her mother, Carol, and sister Vanessa strongly opposed Melissa becoming a single mother. Carol called it shameful, and Vanessa said you cannot handle it, but Melissa did not change her mind. Without interrupting her career at an advertising agency, she was promoted to marketing director and raised her son well. Still, the criticism from Carol and Vanessa never stopped. She was accused of being overprotective, and her parenting choices were constantly questioned. After breakfast, Melissa and Jacob began preparing for the beach. They applied sunscreen, put on swimsuits, and packed snacks and drinks in a bag. "Do not forget your float." Melissa handed Jacob a blue arm float. Her son still could not swim well. A little ahead of schedule, they arrived at the beach. Carol, Vanessa, her husband Mike, and their children, 10-year-old Ethan and 8-year-old Olivia, were already settled under a large beach umbrella. "Finally, you are here," Carol said, looking at her watch. "We have been waiting for 1 hour." "Good morning, Mom." Melissa tried to soften her expression. "We agreed to meet at 10 o'clock, did not we? It is only 9:45. "Melissa, you are always so casual about time," Vanessa said, brushing her brown hair back. She looked perfect in her bikini, in contrast to Melissa's modest one-piece swimsuit. "Jacob." Ethan and Olivia ran over. "Let us build a sand castle." Jacob smiled shyly and looked up at Melissa. "Go ahead," she gently pushed her son's back. "But be sure to tell me when you want to go in the water. Melissa, how long are you going to interfere with your son like that?" Mike looked at her over his sunglasses. "Our kids swim on their own already. Jacob is not confident in his swimming yet." Melissa maintained her composure. "That is because you make him think that way." Carol sighed. "I raised you more strictly, and look, you turned out strong. You are too soft on Jacob." Melissa was about to argue when her phone rang. Her boss's name appeared on the screen. "Excuse me, I need to take this," she said apologetically. "Go ahead, take your work call," Carol waved her hand. "We will watch Jacob." Melissa hesitated for a moment. But this project with a major client was important to her. She kissed her son and instructed, "I will be right back. Remember to tell Grandma or Aunt Vanessa when you want to go in the water." As she walked toward the hotel lobby, she heard Carol and Vanessa whispering behind her. "She is really overprotective, is not she? Jacob needs to learn more independence. Maybe today is a good opportunity." Melissa felt uneasy, but her phone rang again and she left the beach. As Melissa disappeared into the hotel lobby, Carol gave Vanessa a meaningful look. The two had been critical of Melissa's overprotective parenting style for years. "This is our chance," Carol said in a low voice. Let us teach Jacob a little independence." Vanessa nodded at her mother's words. "Melissa spoils her son too much. Our children are more independent." On the beach, the three children had started building a sand castle. After a while, Jacob began gazing toward the ocean. Other children playing at the water's edge looked like they were having fun. "Grandma, can I go in the water?" Jacob asked, holding his blue float. Carol smiled at her grandson. "Of course, Jacob. You are a big boy now. You can play by yourself. But Mom said I should not swim alone. Your mother always worries too much," Carol said. "You will be fine if you stay in the shallow area. Go on, your cousins will go with you." Ethan and Olivia ran ahead, and Jacob, after a moment's hesitation, followed them. He put the float on his arm and cautiously stepped into the surf. Carol and Vanessa sat under the umbrella and started checking their smartphones. Mike, Vanessa's husband, had gone to a nearby vendor to buy drinks. "Look at this." Vanessa showed her mother the screen. Reviews of the resort. "This hotel has a terrible reputation." "That is because Melissa chose it," Carol replied. "She never does enough research." The two laughed together and became absorbed in checking social media and messages. Occasionally they pretended to look toward the children, but they were not really monitoring them. At the water's edge, Ethan and Olivia had returned to the sand and started building a new sand castle. But Jacob was still in the ocean. He had been playing in the shallow water, but the tide was gradually carrying him out to sea. His small body was being tossed around by the deceptively calm surface. "Grandma," Jacob called out, but his voice was lost in the wind. "I cannot get back." Carol and Vanessa did not look up from their smartphone screens. Ethan and Olivia were also absorbed in their play and did not notice their cousin was in trouble. "Help!" Jacob's voice grew fainter. The blue float kept him on the surface, but his feet could no longer feel the sand. With eyes wide with fear staring at the shore, he drifted further and further away. When Mike returned with drinks, he looked around and asked, "Where are the kids playing over there?" Vanessa pointed toward the ocean. "Where is Jacob?" Mike asked, seeing Ethan and Olivia on the sand. Vanessa finally looked up and said, "He was just there 1 minute ago." She looked around but could not see Jacob. "He probably went to the bathroom," Carol said indifferently. "Melissa should be back soon anyway." Just then, Melissa returned to the beach. She hurried to her family, searching for her son. "Where is Jacob?" Anxiety seeped into Melissa's voice. "I do not know." "Playing somewhere," Carol shrugged. "Did he go in the water?" Melissa's voice grew stronger for a little while. Vanessa answered, "But we were watching. He is probably playing with other kids." Melissa quickly looked around, "But his things are here. He would not go off alone. Where is he?" At her panic, Carol rolled her eyes. "Melissa, you are being dramatic. He will come back on his own. Children need to learn independence." The blood drained from Melissa's face. She started running along the beach, calling her son's name and asking people nearby. Then suddenly, she stopped and looked out to sea. Far out in the waves, she could see a blue float and a small head. "Jacob." Melissa's scream echoed across the beach. There, out in the water. She jumped into the ocean and desperately started swimming, but was pushed back by the waves. Hearing her cries, a nearby lifeguard assessed the situation and immediately headed to the rescue. One of the surfers also grabbed his board and paddled out. Carol and Vanessa finally began to grasp the seriousness of the situation and came to the water's edge. "No way." Vanessa's eyes widened. "We were watching," Carol said weakly. "We only looked away for a moment," but Melissa was not listening to their excuses. She collapsed to her knees on the sand, continuing to call her son's name. A crowd began to gather, many looking out to sea. The lifeguard and surfer reached Jacob and carried the unconscious boy to shore. Melissa rushed to her son's side, breathless. Jacob's lips were blue, his face pale. My son, Melissa cried, throwing herself over Jacob's body. The lifeguard quickly began cardiopulmonary resuscitation, and someone had called an ambulance. As the entire beach was gripped with tension and fear, Carol and Vanessa stood at a distance. Their faces showed terror and a slowly dawning sense of guilt. The hospital waiting room was wrapped in heavy silence. Melissa covered her face with both hands, occasionally trembling as she waited for the doctor's report. Beside her, Carol and Vanessa sat anxiously. Mike had taken the children back to the hotel. It was an accident. Carol broke the silence. It could happen to anyone. Melissa slowly raised her face and stared at her mother with frozen eyes. Her voice was low and controlled, but the anger in it was clear. An accident. Mom, you were not watching him. He is only 7 years old. Melissa, we were watching. Vanessa defended. We only looked away for 1 second. 1 second. Melissa's voice rose. He was swept out to sea. You knew he could not swim. That is because you are coddling him. Carol counterattacked. In our day, children learned to swim much earlier. As Melissa was about to respond, a doctor in a white coat entered the waiting room. She immediately stood up. Jacob. Her voice trembled. Miss Carter, the doctor said quietly. Your son has pulled through. We resuscitated him, and his condition is stable. Melissa's knees gave way and she collapsed into the chair. However, the doctor continued, he swallowed a significant amount of seawater. There is damage to his lungs, and we need to monitor him carefully. Also, there is a possibility that oxygen to his brain was temporarily reduced. Will he be okay? Melissa asked in a shaking voice. The next 24 hours are critical. He is currently on a ventilator, but once he regains consciousness, we should be able to remove it. The doctor placed a hand on Melissa's shoulder. Be strong. You will be able to see him soon. After the doctor left, a heavy silence fell again. Melissa stared at the ceiling, holding back tears. Her heart was a confusing mix of fear and anger. Melissa, Carol said, we had no idea this would happen. No idea. Melissa tried to control her voice but failed. You promised to watch him. He is still a child. It is because you are always overprotective, Vanessa argued. We were just trying to teach him a little independence. Independence? Melissa stood up and confronted the two. He nearly drowned. What if he had died? Would you still say you were teaching him independence? Vanessa's face paled. Do not say it like that. Face reality. Melissa pointed at them with a trembling finger. You were busy with your smartphones and ignored my son. Were you teaching independence while staring at your phones? Carol's expression hardened. Melissa, you always blame us. You are deflecting from your own responsibility. My responsibility? Fire lit in Melissa's eyes. How am I to blame? Because you spoiled him and made him weak, Carol said coolly. Other children are stronger. You chose to take that work call. If you had been there. Melissa's hand rose and for a moment she almost slapped her mother. But at the last second she restrained herself. You are blaming me. Her voice trembled. I trusted you. I trusted my family. That was my mistake. Just then a woman in white scrubs entered the room. Miss Carter, I am Lisa, the hospital social worker. Melissa took a deep breath and turned. Yes, that is me. May I speak with you for a moment? Lisa smiled kindly at Melissa. Also, I would like to talk to everyone involved to understand the circumstances of the accident. Carol stiffened. What do you mean? It is standard procedure, Lisa replied calmly. When a child sustains a serious injury, especially when there might be supervision issues involved, we need to clarify the situation. Supervision issues. Vanessa raised her voice. It was an accident. Vanessa, Melissa said in a tired voice, tell the truth. The social worker interviewed the three women separately. When Melissa finished talking first and headed to the intensive care unit, a nurse guided her to a small private room. There, surrounded by tubes and machines, lay Jacob. His small body looked even smaller in the bed, and his face was pale. Melissa took her son's hand and kissed his forehead. Mommy is here, Jacob. You are safe now. Hours passed, and as night deepened, Jacob's condition gradually improved. Near dawn, he finally opened his eyes. Mom. His voice was faint. Jacob. Melissa shed tears of joy. It is okay. You are safe. The doctor was called and checked Jacob's condition. Very good signs, he said. We can probably remove the ventilator. Once the tube was removed, Jacob began speaking in a hoarse voice. I was scared, Mom. I know. You were so brave, Melissa said. What happened? Can you tell me? Jacob thought for a moment before saying, Grandma said I could go in the water, but the waves were strong. I called for help, but Grandma and Aunt Vanessa were looking at their phones. As his words trailed off, social worker Lisa quietly entered the room. She had heard Jacob's words. Hello, Jacob. She smiled gently. How are you feeling? "My throat hurts," he answered. Lisa gave Melissa a look. "May I speak with him? You can stay if you like." Lisa gently asked Jacob what had happened. The boy told her honestly how his grandmother and aunt were checking their phones and did not notice when he called for help, how he was swept away by the waves and thought he could not get back. Everything. Lisa nodded as she took notes. "Thank you, Jacob. You are very brave." When she and Melissa stepped into the hallway, 2 police officers were waiting. "Miss Carter," one officer said, "we would like to talk to you about your son's accident." "It was not an accident," Melissa said firmly. "This was negligent supervision." The officer nodded. "Actually, we received reports from witnesses at the beach. There are multiple testimonies that your mother and sister were engrossed in their smartphones and not paying attention to the child. Furthermore, the officer took out his mobile phone and played a video. It showed Carol and Vanessa staring at their phones under the umbrella. A child's cry could be heard from a distance, but the 2 did not even look up. "This video was taken by a tourist nearby," the officer explained. "They said they heard your son calling for help." Melissa's hands shook. Seeing the evidence, her anger had turned to deep sadness. "We are initiating an investigation for suspected child abuse and neglect," the officer said quietly. "We would appreciate your cooperation." Melissa nodded. Anything down the hallway, Carol and Vanessa were surrounded by police officers. Fear was evident on their faces. Melissa stared at them for a moment before returning to her son's room. 1 week after Jacob was discharged from the hospital, Melissa's Miami apartment was filled with bouquets and cards sent by strangers. The beach incident had been covered by local news and quickly spread on social media. The video had been viewed millions of times and became known nationwide with the title, "Grandmother Engrossed in Smartphone Endangered Grandson." Jacob sat on the living room sofa watching television, but his eyes were vacant. Since being discharged, he was no longer the active child he once was. He suffered from nightmares at night and even refused to get into the bathtub. A child psychologist diagnosed him with water phobia and symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. Melissa stood by the window, clutching her mobile phone. She had just spoken with her lawyer this morning. "Miss Carter," lawyer Alex Morrison had said, "this is not just a family dispute. Your mother and sister clearly neglected their supervisory duties, resulting in serious harm to your son. There are sufficient grounds for a civil lawsuit." Melissa sighed. She felt hesitant about legally suing her mother and sister. Still, the medical expenses and psychological therapy costs for her son's recovery were enormous. Are they even sorry? She asked herself. The answer became clear in yesterday's local news. Carol and Vanessa told reporters that Melissa was overreacting. "We were taking care of our beloved grandson," Carol said in front of the camera. "Children sometimes have accidents. That is a reality parents must accept. Melissa's overprotective parenting has made Jacob weak." When she heard those comments, something broke inside Melissa. As she was lost in thought, her phone rang. It was an unknown number. "Hello, this is Melissa Carter. Miss Carter, this is Laura Henderson from the Miami Herald. Do you have a moment?" Melissa hesitated for 1 second. Until now, she had declined all press interviews. "What is this regarding?" "I have questions about your mother and sister's claims," Laura said frankly. "There are too many contradictions in their story. If you are willing, I would like to hear your side." Melissa looked through the window at Jacob. He was now looking at a drawing he had made as part of his therapy. Drawn with intense blue and black lines, it depicted a small figure screaming in the water. "All right," she decided. "Let us meet." The meeting with Laura was more detailed than Melissa had expected. The reporter not only asked about the incident, but also about Melissa's childhood, her relationship with her mother, and the friction with her sister. "Was Carol strict with you too?" Laura asked. Melissa smiled bitterly. "Mother always demanded high standards, saying she was teaching me strength. But she was lenient with Vanessa. When my sister failed, it was, she is still young, but if I did the same thing, it was, you need to be more responsible. That must have been hard. I was desperate for approval from my mother, but my sister was loved no matter what she did," Melissa said quietly. "Ironically, when I became a single mother, I chose the opposite approach from my mother's parenting. Maybe I am overprotective, but I wanted to always give Jacob safety and love." Laura took notes eagerly. "Is there anything concerning about Carol's past behavior?" Melissa thought for a moment before answering. "Actually, this is not the first time. With a trembling voice, she began talking about Carol's dangerous judgments in the past, driving with Vanessa's children without car seats, letting a 5-year-old grandchild cut vegetables with a knife, leaving the children home alone while going shopping. Mother believes that children grow through strictness, but it is just irresponsibility. The next day, Laura contacted Vanessa's friends and colleagues for more information. Her investigation revealed that Vanessa herself had problems with parenting. Teachers at school were concerned that Vanessa's children were not receiving adequate supervision. 10-year-old Ethan was often late for school and frequently forgot his homework. 8-year-old Olivia showed symptoms of anxiety, and appointments had been set up with the school counselor. But Vanessa failed to show up twice. When Laura's article was published in the newspaper, the impact was explosive. Titled, "Boy Nearly Drowns, Family Neglect Leads to Tragedy." The article detailed Carol and Vanessa's irresponsible behavior and quoted Melissa to reveal the flaws in their parenting approach. In testimony accompanying the article, Jacob's doctor explained the severity of the drowning incident. If help had been delayed by just a few more minutes, he could have suffered permanent brain damage, or in the worst case, he might have lost his life. The community's reaction was immediate. Critical comments flooded Carol and Vanessa's social media accounts. The insurance company where Vanessa worked placed her on indefinite paid leave. Carol's garden club suspended her membership. But the most shocking development came from the police. The afternoon the article was published, 2 officers knocked on Carol's door. They had an arrest warrant for her on suspicion of serious child neglect. Simultaneously, a representative from Child Protective Services visited Vanessa's home and began investigating the welfare of her children. Mike was furious and blamed Vanessa. "Why were not you watching, Jacob? Now our own children are at risk." When Melissa heard this news, she felt mixed emotions. On one hand, she felt relief that her mother and sister were facing the consequences of their actions, but at the same time, she felt sadness at watching her family fall apart. That night, she sat by Jacob's bedside, watching his sleeping face. The boy still held her hand until he fell asleep. "I will do anything to protect my child," she vowed quietly, "even if it is against my own family." The next morning, Melissa's phone rang. The screen displayed Vanessa. She took a deep breath before answering. "Melissa." Vanessa's voice sounded tearful. "Help me. Mike is talking about divorce. He says he will seek custody of the children." Melissa listened silently. "What should I do?" Vanessa began crying. "You understand, do not you, how terrifying it is to lose your children?" "I do understand," Melissa answered quietly. "That is why I cannot forgive you and Mom. But we are family. Yes, we are family." Melissa looked out the window. "But being family does not give you permission to cause harm, especially to children." On the other end of the phone, Vanessa fell silent. 1 year later, on a beach a little way from Miami, Melissa sat on the sand. Next to her, Jacob was practicing swimming in the shallow water with an instructor. He wore a blue rash guard over his swimsuit and followed the instructions with a serious expression. 1 year after the incident, their lives had changed dramatically. Jacob attended therapy twice a week, gradually confronting his fear of water. During the first few months, he was troubled by nightmares and even refused to get into the bathtub, but supported by persistent therapy and his mother's love, he recovered little by little. Today was his first day going into the ocean. "Mom, did you see? I could swim!" Jacob called out joyfully. "I saw. That is amazing." Melissa waved, feeling a small victory in her heart. She herself had been attending therapy, confronting the complex relationship with her mother and sister. The anger and sadness had not completely disappeared, but she had learned how to move forward. The legal outcomes had also been determined. Carol was found guilty of child endangerment through gross negligence and received a suspended sentence. The judge ordered her to perform 200 hours of community service and participate in a child safety program. Vanessa had divorced Mike and was in the midst of a bitter custody battle for her children. She too was ordered to perform community service and attend classes to learn about parental responsibility. Melissa's mobile phone rang and she picked it up. The display showed support group meeting. After the incident, she had started a support group called Parents Protecting Children's Safety. It was a place to share experiences with other parents who had similar experiences and discuss child safety and family toxicity. As she checked that alarm, another message came in. It was a contact from a local newspaper. She had recently started writing a column about child safety. As sunset approached and the instructor announced the end of the lesson, Jacob ran proudly to his mother. "Can we come again tomorrow?" he asked, his eyes shining. Of course, Melissa hugged her son. "You are truly brave." As they prepared to leave the beach, Melissa glanced toward the ocean. The place where last year's tragedy occurred was visible in the distance. She took a deep breath, trying to release that memory. Meanwhile, in another part of the city, Carol was working at a child protection facility as part of her community service. On the surface, she showed signs of remorse, but her messages to friends still seeped with anger toward Melissa. "She dragged me into court. Even though we are family," she wrote. Vanessa was in a similar situation. In her classes on parental responsibility, she played the role of an exemplary student, but in her heart, she still believed she was the victim. She still did not understand the depth of the wound her actions had inflicted on Jacob. But for Melissa and Jacob, today was a day of new beginnings. Despite carrying the pain of the past, they were moving forward one step at a time.